I'm Mike Connaughton, bringing you Incredible Idaho from the comfort of the lovely Elkhorn Resort in Sun Valley. We begin our show tonight with a story about a bird known as the king of the high desert. Big and tough, the sage grouse has braved icy winter winds and hot, dry summers for untold centuries. But lately, their vast numbers have begun to dwindle alarmingly all across the West. It seems the birds didn't bounce back from the drought years of the late 80s and early 90s. And there's no question that habitat loss is part of the problem. But to find out the specifics, the scientists need to follow the bird itself. And that means somehow finding a way to catch and radio collar these kings of the desert.
You and Ellen stay just behind me and outside the beam of the light. If we work on a bird, we see a bird, we'll walk right up to it quickly. Music will be blaring and so forth. You put a net over the bird, then hold it to the ground as quickly as possible. Then we go on to the next bird, and the next netter gets it. Then we'll go on to the next bird, and the netter gets it. And if things go well, we'll have 3 birds.
It has all the trappings of a covert operation.
We'll take everything.
A dark, moonless night. The leader bearing a remarkable resemblance to a Sam Spade character. Whispered instructions. And then the eerie silence suddenly interrupted by an explosion of sound.
Time to.
Surreal, wacky, freaky, bizarre, irrational, eccentric, dreamlike. These are the words that pound through your head, punctuating the tunes of Tom Petty as you follow a very well-educated research biologist through the rocks and sagebrush. It's the Owyhee Desert on a cold, black April night. But blaring music, flashing lights, and marching feet certainly do not make up the standard stuff of serious science. So what is going on here?
Okay, same drill.
It's simply been proven the best way to capture sage grouse. The light stuns the bird into immobility, and the loud music masks the sound of approaching footsteps. Research biologist Jack Conley, the head of this peculiar project, even claims the grouse have musical preferences, maintaining that U2 works best.
Okay, let's go. Let's go do Ellen. She's got the bathing kit, right? Okay.
Jack is triumphant. 4 grouse were spotted crouched in the area, and 3 were captured. A good haul.
I have them. Okay, good job. All right. This is an adult male, yeah.
Captures are done in the spring because the grouse are concentrated. They gather on traditional breeding grounds called leks, usually open spaces like dry lake beds or exposed meadows. There, at dawn, the males perform an elaborate mating dance, strutting about and fanning their tails, displaying feathers arranged in a striking pattern of black and white. They challenge each other, creating a plopping noise by inflating a pair of air sacs located on their breasts. In the quiet hours of early morning, this sound can be heard from over a mile away. This elaborate display is mainly for the benefit of the female grouse, who are watching the spectacle from the sidelines, hidden safely beneath the cover of sagebrush. The males are exposed and vulnerable to predators, especially golden eagles, but they appear oblivious to that fact in their frantic desire to win the privilege of breeding.
They're standing out there making themselves as visible as possible, so it's pretty tough to be a male sage grouse. You take a real beating in March and April.
So it goes to reason that these lek areas are also good hunting grounds for other predators, like our Sam Spade scientist on his midnight mission, hunting for sage grouse to capture and mark.
Every bird we catch gets a leg band. Males get red leg bands, females get green leg bands. Every leg band has the address of the Fish and Game Department as well as a serialized number. And this bird is going to get a radio collar as well.
The radio collar will allow biologists to follow this bird for over a year. Although studies have been done in other high desert areas of Idaho, there's little information on sage grouse in the Owyhees. Where do they winter? How widely are sage grouse distributed here? And what's proving to be one of the biggest concerns, how well are the chicks surviving?
Chick survival for sage grouse seems to have really declined in the last 20 years. It isn't just in Idaho, that's in Colorado, Idaho, throughout the West. And populations are kind of following that, and we're concerned about that and trying to get a handle on why that's occurring.
But it's not going to come over his head.
It's not going to come over his
I
head.
don't think so.
One thing is clear. Sage grouse cannot survive without good quality sagebrush habitat. Drought, wildfires, the encroachment of cheatgrass, agriculture, urban development, all contribute to the loss of this habitat and affect the survival of this species.
Sage grouse are, a bird of the sagebrush steppe. They eat sagebrush in the wintertime. That's all they eat. They nest under sagebrush during the spring, and that's where they nest successfully. If they don't have sagebrush, you won't have sage grouse.
These are the sacs that they inflate during their displays, and then that's what you see kind of puffing out on the bird, filling with air. We don't want the radio to interfere with the sacs or with the breeding display, and so we like to sit right here, and it can't be so tight that it interferes with the bird's feeding either. So we work real hard to try to custom fit every radio to each individual bird.
Once the bird is fitted with the radio, the feathers are preened around it and the grouse is released into the night.
We flush every bird we let go just to make sure that they're able to fly and they're in good shape.
No doubt that fellow will be out on the lek at dawn, oblivious to his new collar as he struts and displays. There's a certain absurd dignity to their movements as they proudly march about.
Oh yeah, they're spectacular birds. It's one of those things that people really make an effort to get up at 4 in the morning to go watch.
There's a lot of folks making efforts on behalf of sage grouse these days. For over a year, this committee has been meeting monthly at a restaurant in the small community of Grandview.
The first thing that your group needs to do is develop some formal roles within your group. It's an accountability.
Working groups like this one are meeting all over the state in areas where sage grouse are in trouble. The members include ranchers, conservationists, hunters, tribal leaders, land managers, and biologists. Anyone who has an interest in preserving this magnificent bird.
Well, I've come to all the meetings from the very beginning, mainly because of a love of wildlife that I have, and I've always had my whole life.
Rancher John Romero says that initially there was a lot of distrust among committee members, but now they've learned to have faith in each other and are working together as a team to identify problems and come up with solutions.
I think it's probably the most important thing that we can do to benefit the sage grouse. I think that it's the only way that we'll ever accomplish anything, because it's the most cohesive and collaborative effort that we can put forth.
The committee members hope that by working together to preserve sage grouse, they can bypass a listing under the Endangered Species Act and avoid all the animosity that will create.
The worst thing that is going to happen if that occurs is sage grouse will lose out. And this, on a group like this, the sage grouse are going to benefit the most because we are truly interested in sage grouse.
These local working groups were instituted by the Idaho Department of Fish and Game in 1997 to get communities involved in wildlife decisions.
We recognize the local communities and local users really have to feel part of this process, to really want to have sage grouse here, to want to do the right thing for sage grouse. Because, as I point out to a lot of people, a good rangeland is good for sage grouse, it's good for livestock folks, it's good for everybody.
Herb Meyer is a hunter and conservationist. In this working group, he represents the Nature Conservancy, a nonprofit organization dedicated to the preservation of plants, animals, and natural communities.
I think everybody realizes, because of other wildlife, that if we don't take care of it ourselves, the federal government's going to be dictating how we use the land, and it's going to affect not only the ranchers, but the people who recreate down in Owyhee County for disturbance and whatever. And so Idaho needs to take care of its wildlife, and that's very important.
just last minute everything fell apart and we ended up landing on the ground and tearing up the machine.
The incredible maneuverability of the helicopter has revolutionized the way scientists gather information about our wild animals. It's also added a certain amount of risk to the job. This year, for the first time in over a decade, the Department of Fish and Game has experienced 2 helicopter crashes. No one was seriously injured, but it was enough to cause the agency to take another look at its training policy.
I think there's an increased awareness, and I suspect that a lot of our folks in the field will be more alert to what they're supposed to be looking for, and we'll probably be setting up some additional training or retraining or re-emphasis.
Biologists from the Idaho Department of Fish and Game will fly over 2,000 hours in 1999, conducting wildlife counts, capturing animals for research studies, surveying salmon habitat, and planting fish in Idaho's mountain lakes. All flights are booked through the U.S. Office of Aircraft Services, or OAS. That's been Fish and Game policy since 1987, when a tragic helicopter accident took the life of a pilot and seriously injured a wildlife biologist and a conservation officer. They were flying in a Hiller helicopter along the middle fork of the Salmon River, counting bighorn sheep. On the way back to base camp, the tail rotor failed.
We just spun into the mountainside and rolled down the hill. Pretty nasty accident. Kind of a combination of equipment failure and pilot error put us on the ground. That was about 6 o'clock in the evening, and the officer and I we had some minor injuries, but the pilot was pretty seriously injured. And we couldn't get out to anyone, couldn't talk to anyone, no one could find us until the next morning. And by that time, the pilot had died during the course of the night. So I guess for me personally, that's when I started taking the flying a lot more seriously, particularly the safety.
Since Mike's accident, a strict safety program has been instituted at Fish and Game. In addition to the policy that all flights must be booked with OAS-approved aircraft and pilots, a flight following system has been introduced.
86 Fox is off Ball Mountain Helibase. I'll be working the Ball Mountain training.
It's a check-in procedure where the aircraft is contacted every hour from the ground.
In a helicopter crash or aircraft accident, the first 24 hours are really important, especially for injured passengers or pilots. And then the next 48 to 72 hours is important for uninjured people as far as survival rates. So if you have a flight plan followed and you're actively following with somebody, you cut down that response time.
Wildlife biologist Jeff Rollman estimates he flies 180 hours annually for Fish and Game. But this winter his luck ran out. He was involved in a helicopter accident with veteran pilot Jim Pope at Taylor Ranch on the middle fork of the Salmon River.
Yeah, it's the first time I've had an accident, first time I've even had a real close call, and it all happened in one.
They were coming in on a typical landing when they suddenly dropped about 8 feet to the ground, and then the problems really began.
After the landing, the power in the rotor blades just started, the torque in them and everything started churning up the ship. You know, it twisted the shafts and things that caused the rotor blades to change directions, and that's mainly what did the damage to the ship.
Jeff had a few things in his favor. He was flying with an experienced pilot, and he was well trained himself in how to react in an emergency. He was very shaken, and it was extremely difficult the first time he climbed back into a helicopter. But despite all this, Jeff doesn't feel the accident was due to insufficient safety precautions.
I think it's something that was a fluke. You know, I wouldn't expect it to happen again. You know, it's just not something I even expected then. You know, I think when you look at the odds and the hours in the air and stuff, eventually, you know, you get strings of bad luck, and I think hopefully that's what we've just gone through.
Any system isn't perfect, but we think it's a real good system and a safe system.
We routinely would drive the streets here, and there would be hawks sitting in trees above kids that are playing and people that are, you know, washing their cars, and they just totally ignore them.
In our next story, we'll join some scientists as they track the movements of a small bird of prey called the sharp-shinned hawk. Recently, biologists have discovered that a large number of these birds spend their winters and early springs enjoying the city life of Nampa. Even though the hawk is wearing a radio transmitter, it's a difficult business spotting her among the trees and buildings of the city. And it's debatable as to who was most frustrated in the chase, wildlife biologist Bruce Hawk, the college students assisting him on the project, or our own Incredible Idaho photographer Tom Hadzer. Downtown Nampa. It's not exactly what comes to mind when you think of birds of prey. But cruising the streets of the city with his radio receiver rotating isn't exactly normal duty for fish and game biologist Bruce Hawk either. Somewhere out there in suburbia, a sharp-shinned hawk has a tiny radio transmitter attached to her tail feathers. And somewhere out there, she's sending a signal for scientists to follow.
Part of what we're trying to understand is how do these animals make a living within a human habitation? Because this doesn't really, look like wildlife habitat for most people. And part of it is that there simply isn't much information available on the way these birds of prey survive during the winter, and particularly survive in an urban area.
Assisting on this project are biology students from Northwest Nazarene College.
Well, where are they, Captain Bruce?
Most of the tracking is done by these students, Joel Sauter and Shelby Schmolinger.
We can't see them very often, and because they're always hidden in the trees. And so when we do get to see them, it's like really exciting.
Well, the transmitter signal tells us she's right down along this drain ditch somewhere. Better than even odds that she's sitting real low in these brushy areas. And we'll just see if we can find her. This is pretty much urban dwelling here.
City tracking can be hazardous. The buildings tend to reflect the signal, and electrical wiring may interfere with it. Then there's traffic, private property, pets, and fences to deal with.
Had the cops called on me. Somebody thought I was snooping in their house when I was looking through a spotting scope, kind of watching the bird, and so they called me in for suspicious behavior.
I think we built a habitat for hawks in a desert. I mean, these towns weren't here 150 years ago, and birds like the sharp-shinned hawk and the merlin we know nest far north of Idaho. Well, it's close, though. It's real close. And so I would say that the development of houses and the shrubberies and the tree component have given these birds that would normally migrate to southern states a place to stop over for the winter. There it is, right there. It's right there, Tom. It's right. It landed up on the top of that tree.
Of course, by the time Tom gets his camera swung around, the hawk is already on the wing and soon gone. And the chase is back on. We finally catch up to her almost 2 hours later in the backyard of a cooperative homeowner. She's difficult to see, hidden in the thick branches of a tree, but Tom finally has his shot.
Sometimes it's kind of like the lotto. Sometimes you're lucky and sometimes you're not.
Sounds a lot like wildlife photography. Up next, a tribute to one of Idaho's true conservationists.
It's a fantastic state. Desert, mountains, forests, you name it, we got it.
Tonight we close our show with a tribute to an old friend. This spring, the Nature Conservancy of Idaho honored Jack Hemingway for his extraordinary effort in helping to preserve one of Idaho's premier trout streams, Silver Creek. Jack was also the original host for Incredible Idaho, and it's been quite an honor for me to fill the shoes of a man so well known as a conservationist and a world-class fly fisherman. You'll love it here, Ernest Hemingway wrote to his 17-year-old son Jack in 1940. I saw more big trout rising than I've ever seen. Papa was right. Jack saw big, beautiful rainbow trout in Silver Creek that summer. But as he wrote in his autobiography, Misadventures of a Fly Fisherman, he was thoroughly humbled by his fishing experience.
I could catch all the fish I wanted in Wood River, but this was always a challenge. And it wasn't until really years later that I felt that I was relatively efficient at catching fish here.
Jack came back to Idaho as often as he could until he finally moved here permanently in 1967.
It's a fantastic state. Desert, mountains, forests, you name it, we got it.
But for a while in the mid-70s, it looked as though the wonderful trout waters of Silver Creek may be lost to development.
Well, if it weren't for Jack Hemingway, Silver Creek probably would be a totally different looking place right now. And he was the one who had the foresight to make the call to the Nature Conservancy.
In 1975, Jack spearheaded a tremendous effort to raise the $500,000 it would take to buy Silver Creek Ranch and put it into the hands of a nonprofit organization called the Nature Conservancy. And now the clear waters of Silver Creek beckon fly fishermen from all over the world, a living legacy. And in closing our show tonight, Jack Hemingway reads the words of fly fisherman John Volker, a retired judge and author.
I fish because I love to, because I love the environs where trout are found, which are invariably beautiful. Because trout do not lie or cheat, or cannot be bought or bribed, or impressed by power, but respond only to quietude and humility and endless patience. Because I suspect that men are going along this way for the last time, and I, for one, don't want to waste the trip. And finally, not because I regard fishing as being so terribly important, but I suspect that so many of the other concerns of men are equally unimportant and not nearly so much fun. Amen.